Hi folks, today I'm going to do a job that I really don't want to do. It's called changing the lower control arm bushings on the 450 here, and a couple of years ago I did the right hand side of the car here, and to say the least it was a friggin' nightmare. And to do this job we have to pull the spring out, and I hate springs. I've had a couple of run-ins with springs in the past. Anyway, the parts are cheap but the jobs are major. I'll take you through it now, see how we get on. Right, I've got the car up on stands and I hope I've got it high enough to get the spring out. I think that's where I fell down the last time I had the car. I didn't think I had it high enough, and I've got the whole car up on stands. Try and keep it even. The bugger of all this is putting it back together. Anyway, the first thing we do is undo the shocker bolts down the bottom, and they're 13mm. So I've got my little ratchet here. I'm going to just reach under and unbolt the shocker bolts. Next thing we do is unbolt the steering arm, crack it here. So I'm going to take the split pin out and take the nut off and get my ball joint cracker and unbolt it. This is an 18mm socket, by the way. Okay, that just cracked off. Now the next thing we're going to do is undo the brake line up here. There's only one problem on my car. Some bastard mechanic has done this nut so tight that if I try to undo it, I'm going to kink this metal line here. So in my case, what I've got to do is I'm going to unbolt the calipers at the back and tie them up somewhere. The thing about undoing the brake line anyway, you've got to bleed them, and hopefully I won't have to bleed the brakes by pulling the brake calipers off. Here I go. An interesting thing is, in the book it makes no mention whatsoever of the stabilizer arm here, where it bolts down into the lower control arm, or wishbone, some people call it wishbones. So I mean, obviously you can't get it out unless you unbolt the bloody thing, so I'll unbolt that. At this stage we now have a jack, well I had it there all the time anyway, underneath the control arm, because later on it's got to take the weight of this spring. So anyway, I'll unbolt the control arm and get it out of the way. I should say I'll unbolt the stabilizer arm and get make it so it can come out. Right, the next job we do is go to the cam bolts here and undo the nuts, 22mm. This one at the front you can't get a socket on because of this bit of metal here. And what you do, there's a slot there. I don't know if you can see it, I'll go up closer. See the slot? And what we're going to do is get a cold chisel, and I'm going to stamp where that slot lines up. And to make it easy, I'm going to take this washer off. And the point of that exercise is you've got to put the cam bolts back where they were, and afterwards we get a wheel alignment done, because it adjusts your camber. Very important. And also have the jack under there. So I'll just mark these. I'll take the washer off to make it easier, and then we'll carry on. Okay, at this stage we're ready. According to the books and everything, it says knock out the cam bolts, lower the jack and pull out the spring. The spring in its position here, I thought I might try and put spring clamps on it to make my life easier, but unfortunately you can't. They won't fit as it is. So I'll do what the book says. I'm going to knock out those pins and lower the jack down here and pull out the spring, hopefully. Here we go. Right, I now have the cam bolts out, and so now I'll very slowly let down the jack, see what happens. One side of the control arm stuck a little bit. I had to get a pinch bar. Anyway, I've swung it out, position, and now I've got to work the spring out. Oh, I can see what's happening. It's hooked on the torsion bar. Anyway, I'll work the spring out and then we'll carry on. Our next job is to disconnect the ball joint down here from the lower axle and well, stud axle, but it's very hard to get a socket on it there, and I want to get my ball joint cracker onto it. So what I'm going to do is unbolt the steering arm from here and make life a little bit easier for myself. Not in the book, but I'm going to give it a go. These bolts are 19mm, by the way. Right, now I can get at that lower ball jointy thing here. It's 22mm socket, and hopefully I can get my ball joint cracker on it once I get the nut off. Here we go. Well, that seemed to work. All I did was my nut cracker got me on the knuckle when it burst, but other than that everything's fine. I'll give the lower control arm a clean, and they say in the book to press out the bushes, but I'm going to use a mash hammer and a dolly because I don't have a press, and so I did the last one. When you put this back in the car, these fit in by thousands of an inch. It's a real pain in the ass lining it up to get it back in. Like I said earlier, I think that's the hard part of the whole job. Anyway, I'll give it a clean, and then I'll attack it with a dolly and a mash hammer. Also, we'll test the thing by doing that if there's any metal fatigue. Might as well find out now. So here we go. Well, the good news is that I'm not doing this in vain. You can see in there that the rubber's completely worn out on the inside. I hammered out one end with a chisel and everything. You butcher them, and like I say, you hammer out one end and makes it easier. Then I can just get the dolly and hammer out the other side. Okay, after some physical exertion, I got the bushes out, and we know that there's no metal fatigue in this thing because of the smashing and the banging. Next, I'm going to just clean out these holes and put the new bushes in. Having a press would be a good idea, but I'm going to whack them in with a mash hammer. And the book says put a bit of rubber grease on them to make them, you know, a bit slide in a bit easier. But I'm going to use a bit of transmission fluid because I don't have any rubber grease. Okay, the bushes are in. Now we'll go back and try and put it back on the car. Rightio, I put the bolt in the lower part of the axle there onto that ball joint. Currently the ball joint's slipping a little bit, so I decided I'll put it in the car and put pressure on it and tighten it up later. I've just put the spring in the lower control arm. You've got to make sure that the spring base down there lines up into the bottom of the control arm. The other thing is, I changed the rubber at the top here, only because I knew I was pulling the spring out, and I thought, bugger the expense, pay the $5. Save coming back again. The other one's just got a little bit of a tear, that's all. Anyway, I shall try putting the jack underneath there, lining the spring up and jacking it up for the cam bolts. Right, I've got the jack under the spring. We've got a little ways to go. I'll have to kick it around a bit to line up the bushes there. And the other thing is your shock absorber. Line up your 2 bolts for that. As I was saying, it's harder putting a spring back in the lower control arm than what it is to pull it out. And I removed the shock absorber, make life a little bit easier. It gets in the way. Currently I've got the control arm nearly in position up there. I've got both sides sort of in. I've only had the spring kick out once on me. What you've got to do is just keep lowering and raising the jack and moving it around and everything, and trying to get it in a position where you can get it up. So I'm going to go up some more and put something through the holes to hold it, and tap the cam bolts in. Okay, I've put the cam bolts in, and what I'm going to do is lower the jack and then try to adjust the cam bolts or wind them back to where I marked them, and then I'll put the nuts back on, but not fully tight. Okay, I managed to leave the steering knuckle down here to finally pull up the nut, and now I'm putting a tension wrench on it for 80 Newton meters. Okay, I've sort of tightened up those cam bolts. I just put the shock absorber back in. The torque for under here is 25 Newton meters for those nuts that go on the bottom of the shock. Next I'm going to put in the steering arm back on. Okay, I'll put the steering arm back on, and the bolts are here, and I just positioned the brake caliper. The brake caliper bolts are 115 Newton meters torque, and I made these the same, and they have metal flaps here to hit over. So I'll tap them back. Then I'm going to put the steering arm back in and tighten that up, and put the torsion bar back in, the connector for that, and tighten up the top of the shock absorber. Okay, the stabilizer bar bolt pin thing here, you tighten up to 25 Newton meters. Rightio, the steering arm ball joint here, you tighten up to 80 Newton meters. And all I've got to do now is double check that the brake line's not rubbing against anything, and wheel spins like that, and tighten up the top of the shock absorber. Well, the car's back together and on the ground. Now this is where they tell you to set your torsion wrench to 120 Newton meters, and tighten up the nuts on the cam bolts underneath the car while it's resting on the ground. I'll try. Anyway, let's assume I win, and what I'm going to do is do that, and then I'm going to take the car for a test drive after I'll wash my hands and everything, and then I'll have a beer. Okay, that's the end of this little chore. I should add that the first stop will be a wheel alignment.